Welcome to In Our Nature, St. John, where city streets meet salt marshes. St. John, New Brunswick ecosystems tell a story of resilience. Join us as we explore how nature and people coexist. The St. John Naturalists Club can be found under Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Nature St. John. Come study, conserve, educate, and enjoy nature together with us on the east coast of Canada. Donations are accepted at the Canada Helps website. When you think about birding in St. John, one name comes up again and again, Hank Scarth. For years, Hank has been at the heart of conservation in New Brunswick, leading projects like the Greenlaw Mountain Hawk Watch and the Shorebird Conservation and Education Project. But his work goes far beyond data and field notes. Hank has built a community. Through the St. John Naturalists Club, he's introduced countless people to the thrill of spotting their first hawk in migration or the quiet beauty of shorebirds along the coast. What makes Hank's story so compelling is the way he blends science with passion. He's not only protecting habitats and species, he's opening doors for others to experience nature in a way that sticks with them. Whether it's through workshops, guided walks, or simply sharing his enthusiasm, Hank has become a bridge between conservation and everyday enjoyment of the outdoors. Today we'll hear how his journey in birding began, why these projects matter, and how one person's dedication can ripple out to inspire an entire community. Hank, today I thought we could talk about your experience with shorebirds.
That would be great.
Shorebirds seem to be of particular interest to you. What is it about this group that drew you into their world?
Oh my, let me count the ways. It's such a diverse group of birds in size and habitats and appearance and so on. So that's always very interesting as well. Just the sheer beauty of seeing these birds in flight. We see them in our region in the thousands by times in mid to late summer. It's just an incredible sight. But I think the most important thing, first and foremost, is that drew me to them is their amazing migrations. These little tiny birds that weigh about as much as a Mars bar at best will travel some 10,000 kilometers a year at least.
Wow, that's impressive.
On their annual migrations. Wow. So that's just an amazing story, and I just love that, and I think that's really what drew me to them as much as anything.
And what are the best times of year to observe these shorebirds in southeast New Brunswick?
To me, it's mid to late summer. That's when the birds are returning from their Arctic nesting grounds on their way to South America, and they stop in the Bay of Fundy to refuel and to rest, obviously. It's a non-stop flight from the north and another one coming up to South America. So they come to the Bay of Fundy for abundant resources to feed on and then to roost on our beaches when the tide is high. So that's the best time. And again, our shorebirds are migratory, so they're not here in the wintertime. So get out in the summer, late summer, and enjoy this wonderful spectacle.
Now, you say they fly from the Arctic all the way to South America. How far south do they go?
Let me tell you about what we call Sanderling 12 plus.
Okay.
Sanderling 12 plus is a bird that we found on the beach a couple of years ago, and Sanderling weighs about 60 grams, and this bird had a flag on its leg. And a flag is the way the researchers mark the birds so they can be spotted from a distance, right, and gives them an idea of what group of birds they had marked with this particular flag. So we spotted this bird on the beach. I have good camera gear, and I was able to not just get the 12 plus number off his green flag on his leg, wow, but also the band number on the metal band on his leg. Mm-hmm. And I was able to get online and find the story of this particular Sanderling. So again, picture this little tiny white shorebird. It's the one that runs along the top of the waves on the beach that people will be quite familiar with. So this little bird was captured and marked in New Jersey on May 18th, 2022. So here it is, it's the springtime. That bird's headed north to, and Sanderlings go to the high Arctic. So it was headed north. We can only presume that it was successful because it made it back. The next time it was sighted was southeast of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil.
Oh my goodness.
Exactly. On March 31st the following year. And then so We can only again assume that that bird made it back to the Arctic to nest, and then ended up on Saints Rest Beach in St. John on August 18th, 2023, so the following year. And if you just do straight lines of where that bird had been in that period of time, it's around 40,000 kilometers. So what that bird and all of its fellow small shorebirds would have faced in that time in terms of predators, habitat issues, things that cause disturbance to them, storms, all of that, that bird was successful in traveling some 40,000 straight line kilometers. So to me, that's a good example of why these birds are so enthralling to me.
And would that bird have flown like straight down the coast, or would other things like prevailing winds affect its flight patterns? Would it be more of a zigzag, or is it more?
Yeah, I'm not certain with sanderlings. I believe they are like our semi-palmated sandpipers, the very common ones, where they fly nonstop. And again, with weather conditions, storms, whatever they might meet along the way, we can be pretty much assured that they aim in a straight line for the northern part of South America. But in all likelihood, they do get buffeted around, and over the 3 to 4 days it takes them, they get there. They leave here fattened up. The reason they've been here, and they arrive down there at about half their weight. So it shows how efficiently they can use stored fat to get where they need to go.
So you're saying 3 to 4 days to get there?
Yes, apparently tagging studies have shown birds that have left the head of the Bay of Fundy and have been resighted or collected in Suriname, for example, in South America, about 4 days later.
Well, it takes me about a good 2 days to get to South America from here, so I'm impressed that a little bird can do that in 4 days. What is the most common shorebird species you can expect to see in this region?
That would be the semi-palmated sandpiper. It is the one that I think a lot of New Brunswickers would be familiar with, because it is really, I think it's well known because of the efforts of conservation groups to share information about these birds. So people may be familiar with these wonderful murmurations, as they're called, when maybe 10 or 20 or 30,000 birds take to the air at the same time, and they perform these wonderful dances in the sky in perfect synchronization. And it's just an amazing sight. And I think it is so captivating that people, whether they're interested in birds or not, do find this rather beautiful. And of course, so many people stop at the big stop in Aulac, as Maritimers, and they celebrate the birds there. So that it has become, that little species has become sort of part of our New Brunswick natural history story.
That's interesting. Little bird has so much impact. We talked about birds migrating. Do any stay around?
Very few. We have about 32, 34 species of shorebirds that we see some regularity in New Brunswick. Very few actually, I'm sorry, you asked about if they stay around through the winter. There's only one. The purple sandpiper is a bird that you can find on the rocky outcrops in the Bay of Fundy 12 months of the year. On the coldest days in January, that bird's quite content. And it forages among the rockweed and in the intertidal zone, which doesn't freeze up. Most other shorebirds are insect eaters, invertebrate eaters, some with some small fish. And of course, everything freezes up in the wintertime, so there would be no food for them. Right. So virtually every other species, and I think I'm correct in saying this, leaves, except that little, very tough little purple sandpiper.
Interesting. What are the most effective ways to observe shorebirds without disturbing their habitat?
I guess the easy answer is from a distance. And that's often how you're going to see shorebirds in any event, because they're often out on the intertidal area, on tidal flats, or in the marsh. And, it's not often that you can get close to shorebirds. But when you can, I think it's like just respect for wildlife, regardless of what animals we may be talking about, is just keep your distance. If you come across some roosting shorebirds or feeding shorebirds, just sort of back away, be quiet, don't move quickly, or if you want to photograph, don't get too close, because the whole objective would be to avoid flushing the birds into the air, because when they're flying, they're not feeding, and they need those food resources to grow, obviously, when they're young, and then really importantly, before their long-distance migration. So we don't want them in the air burning off the energy from the food they've consumed. So that's the main thing to keep in mind. If you don't have a pair of binoculars, borrow a pair when you're going out looking for some birds. Or if you're lucky enough to have a scope, that's even better, a spotting scope. But again, I think there are cases and places where you can get quite close to shorebirds. Just remember that general principle of being calm, quiet, and not flashy, and with the intent of keeping the birds at ease while they're feeding.
And what type of shorebirds would roost here in New Brunswick?
The ones we're concerned with primarily are the smallest of the shorebirds, what are nicknamed the peeps. And these little and of course they're quite appropriately named as peeps because that's what they sound like. They peep away. But these birds, these are the ones that are the long-distance migrants that have come down from the north, and they feed on the tidal flats at low tide, and then they roost on our beaches at high tide. And when they're roosting, they're resting, obviously, and they are converting what they've taken in the way of food into these water-soluble fats. So this includes, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the semi-palmated sandpiper, but also we have least sandpipers, which is the smallest sandpiper in the world. They're quite common. And then following behind them are the sanderling, our 12-plus bird who has that wonderful story. Then scattered others like black-bellied plover, a larger one. A number of these birds will have the same pattern of feeding and roosting. So these are the ones we're most concerned about on our beaches.
What conservation efforts are currently being implemented to protect shorebird populations in our region?
I think first and foremost, there are a number of groups, NGOs and agencies and volunteer groups that are working very hard to protect the remaining coastal habitats, salt marshes and so on, in the Bay of Fundy. And we have lost a lot of that type of habitat over the years from industrial infilling and, for whatever reasons, for agriculture and so on. And so if we don't have the habitat that these birds need to find their prey and to roost and so on, obviously the birds can't survive. So there's a lot of effort underway by a lot of groups to do that. On the sort of the more micro side, if you will, we have groups, including the St. John Naturalist Club, that have projects where they work to protect the birds when they're on the roost beaches. And these beaches are very popular destinations for people, for recreation, for fishing, for whatever, you would love to get out to the beach. And so education around that's very important, and there are a number of groups doing that. Beyond that, we do have the Migratory Bird Act, which does protect these birds in their nesting and migration habitats, that sort of thing, which are there as well. So there is an official side of this as well in protecting migrating birds. Those are the first things that come to mind of what's underway.
If somebody wanted to get more involved in shorebird conservation, what would they do? What would the next steps be for any listeners who are interested in?
Well, I have a strong bias here. At the Naturalist Club in St. John, we have what we call the Shorebird Conservation and Education Project. And it gives the opportunity to join with us to meet with fellow New Brunswickers and visitors to the region on our beaches, and in particularly the Saints Rest Beach, to let them know about these wonderful birds, to get them excited about them, and to encourage them to spend their time on the beach in a way that is respectful of the need for these birds to roost. So get a hold of us and come on out and be part of this project. It's a lot of fun. We have quite a good number of volunteers. They find it really quite rewarding. They meet a lot of interesting people and get some great feedback.
My understanding is the Shorebird Conservation and Education Project just finished its 6th year. How did it come about?
I think it's... I've been going to Saints Rest Beach for a long time to look at shorebirds and take pictures and so on. And I've always been aware of the need for these birds to rest undisturbed during this time of the year. And there was lots of people enjoying the beach. It is an open access beach, so there's no particular protections for the birds. And so, people would love to run through them and see them fly in their murmurations. and dogs would be running along and people walking their dogs on the beach and putting the birds into the air, that sort of thing. And of course, eventually it just got to the point where I said, I can't do nothing here. So I was thinking, well, what if we got a group of, like-minded people? If I could find some volunteers to come out, we'll just talk to people and try and, get the message across. So that's basically where it came about, and it's grown over time. And we have some 30 different volunteers take part in at least one visit to the beach. And, we do a lot of things with it now. We have talk and walks with the general public, and we publish a lot of material on our social media platforms about the need to protect these birds and their story, of course, their conservation and migration stories. And so it's become quite a successful effort, I would say. And I should say right off the bat that my first approach when we were thinking about this was to the Irving Nature Park people, J.D. Irving. Oh, they were most enthusiastic and have provided support and encouragement and meeting places and so on ever since we began 6+ years ago.
So I think then the project is aptly named Conservation and Education, because it is really both.
Well, it is, and I did fail to mention that a key component of the conservation part of the project is that not only do we meet and educate, but we conduct detailed shorebird and all birds actually counts. And we do that not just on the beach, but on the feeding flats, the tidal flats, in the marsh, on the boardwalk, and on the eastern beach. So we have a number of sites where we actually count and report to through eBird to all of our sightings, and that data evidently become available without charge to anybody who's doing research or otherwise wanting information about the birds. That also fulfills the requirements of the Atlantic Canada Shorebird Survey and the International Shorebird Survey. So it all goes into a big melting pot of data for research. And most specifically on the conservation side, it's my conclusion, and this is not a science-based conclusion, but the birds that come to Saints Rest and the Irving Nature Park are a different subset from the birds that arrive at the head of the bay. And the reason I believe that is that they arrive later. The ones at the head of the bay peak around August 10th. Ours are around the 1st of September. And that suggests to me that the birds are coming directly from the north here. So it's a smaller group of birds. It's not the hundreds of thousands at the head of the bay, but rather we will peak out around 8 to 10,000 perhaps at the most. So, in my mind, even more reason to conduct a project like this, because if it is its own small subset, then it's a particular risk when it's at the Irving Nature Park, if those lands and tidal flats and so on are not protected into the future.
And who funds the project?
We've been funded principally, and I should say the funding goes toward the hiring of a counter-educator who does the work the volunteers do and more. During weekdays, the volunteers work on the busy weekends. But in any event, the funding has come primarily through the New Brunswick Wildlife Trust Fund. The Fund Council obviously has seen the value in the project, and they've been generous enough to fund us each year. We also have had funding from Birds Canada, which is, of course, the largest bird-related NGO involved in conservation in the country. And from the Environmental Trust Fund as well for some of the administrative side and some of the other activities of the project. Without them, the project would be purely volunteer-driven, and that would be a lot smaller project than what we do now.
Right. Why would they be interested in your findings? What are they looking for?
I think, in simple terms, to me, it's trend data. We know that shorebirds have declined, depending on species, something like 40 to 70% since 1970.
That's significant.
It is significant. Yeah. They're one of the harder hit groups of birds in terms of conservation. So I think this provides just additional data and additional weight to the work that's going on to try and figure out why this might be the case. So the data we gather is it contributes to a much larger database on information on how the birds are doing year to year. So in other words, trend data over time. Like I had a boss once that used to say, you can't manage what you don't know. And if you don't track and understand what is trending in terms of populations, then you don't know where to invest what resources might be available into research, protection, restoration, that sort of thing. So we're a small component of that data going in, but in my mind, an important one.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And what do you think might be the reason?
These conservation issues are rarely one thing. I guess I'm speaking the obvious, but we do know that there's been habitat loss over time, both in their wintering areas and in migration routes as well. So that's always
due to development.
Due to development, just human pressures.
Yeah,
probably. And again, I've read reports on this, but climate change has to be having a significant impact, because when you think about it, these migration patterns evolved over 11,000 years, I suppose, or some portion of that since the last ice age. That birds would arrive in the north, for example, in mid-May, at the exact time when the insect populations are at peak hatch time. So you have also a big bloom of insect populations, so that when the chicks are hatching in the far north, they're not fed by the adults. They're immediately these little furry balls running around chasing bugs. If the birds are arriving up there at the same time now as they did 40 years ago, they're finding a very different climate when they get there, because climate change happens much more quickly at the poles than it does at the equator. So the insect hatch is bound to be earlier. The timing of their arrival there is probably not shifting that much. So that's got to be a part of it. Mm-hmm. Now, interestingly and encouragingly, Julie Paquette at the Canadian Wildlife Service, who's a shorebird biologist, was telling me one of the things about the semi-palmated sandpiper, the very common one we've been talking about, is that they're not fussy. So if climate change has changed the species mix of insects or the invertebrates on the tidal flats or whatever, they tend to be fairly adaptable and can use these different species apparently to survive. And in all populations there are outliers. So you have certain birds that are arriving earlier just by the nature of the beast, and taking advantage. And if they're successful in their nesting and have good, healthy chicks, those birds are more likely to come back earlier. So I guess the big question is, can these populations survive a rapidly changing climate? Can they adapt quickly enough through their own evolutionary pressures that we can see these birds continue to be part of our natural world? Mm-hmm. The evidence of the last 50 to 70 years is not encouraging. Birds are in decline, but nonetheless, everyone involved in this type of work is optimistic, and that we believe our efforts can contribute to their ongoing success.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, a pleasure.
And I always appreciate your insight.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for stopping by to listen to In Our Nature St. John today. Remember, we can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Nature St. John. Donations are accepted through the Canada Helps website. We host events every month, and they can be found listed on our website at stjohnnaturalistclub.org/events. Please follow and subscribe to our monthly podcast, and if you have any ideas for discussion, let us know in the comments. Until next time.